For the outlines of this presentation includes the problem statement, research objectives, materials, and experimental testing plan, resilient models results, modeling and statistical analysis, experiment stream results and modeling, and finally conclusions and recommendations. For the problem statement, as we know, we depend on in Egypt is the actual 1993 methods for the pavement structure design, and this method depend on the values of the resilient models of subgrade materials. However, this test is less available in Egypt, and we commonly use the CPR values. So the Egyptian code recommended some populations for unbound material, and for the subgrade materials, we used the Holcomb and the Plumb correlations, which conducted in 1962. However, these correlations was developed based on six types of clay and sand soils, and they was collected from one state in America. And we know the resilient models value is not constant and is variable because it depends on the values of anticipated field stresses, which are confining and deviatoric stress. So there is a study conducted in 2014 by G to generate the anticipated field stresses, deviatoric and the confining pressure for subgrade materials. However, these values was conducted based on three types of soils, which are classified as according to H2 to E4, E6, and E7, 6. And it was conducted only one condition of traffic loading as shown in the figure. The value of the wheel load is 20 kilonewton, and the conductive pressure is 566 kilopascal. The characterization of pavement layers as shown in the figures for includes the asphalt, granular base, and subgrades. And for the asphalt layer thicknesses, used five values of thickness as shown in the figures. And for the sub granular base, only two thickness of base layers as commonly used for pavement sections. And for the subgrade materials, they used two values of resilient modulus depend on linear analysis to generate the anticipated field stresses. The output for this study includes the values of deviatoric stress and confining pressure as shown in the table. For the deviatoric stress, range between 41 to 48, and for the confining pressure, range between 7 to 14 kilopascal for subgrade materials. So for the research objectives includes four goals, which are develop database for local subgrade materials collected from different locations in Egypt, including routine properties and advanced characterizations. And this second is propose new anticipated field stress based on local subgrade material properties using linear analysis tools by thin layer softwares, and calibrate new correlations between MR CPR for Egyptian code based on local investigated subgrade materials, and finally evaluate the behavior of impairment formation for local subgrade materials. As we know, the major distress in Egypt is rotting because the behavior, both the characterization of the materials and the weight of subgrade materials. The second headlines includes the materials and experimental testing plan. For the materials, we collected 16 types of materials from different locations in Egypt, as shown in the map. Some of materials collected from the literature for graduate student, and the others testing in the lab. As shown, the materials range between clay, silt, gravel sand, and replacement soils. It's a commonly used soil in both subgrade material in Egypt. Um, and for the experimental testing plan includes two categories of testing, which are routine test and advanced test. And for the advanced test includes the repeated loading triaxial test to estimate the resilient models value and the soil shape strength to calculate shear parameters, which are C and phi parameters. And as shown, the soils categorized the two types, which are cohesive and cohesionless soils. So we conducted the two types of shears test, which are undrained, unconsolidated triaxial test for cohesionless soil, and the unconfined compression test for the cohesive soils. And finally, conducted a multi-stage repeated loading triaxial test for studying the behavior of permanent strain for local subgrade materials. As shown in the two tables, the values of routine properties of for investigated subgrade materials, which are CPR value, elasticity index, passing from SAFE number 200, and soil classification according to ASHTO and the USSAS. And we said the the local investigated materials divided two types, which are cohesive and cohesionless soils. And cohesive almost lay with high plasticity. For the resilient models test, we conduct repeated loading triaxial test according to ASHTO T 307. And this table shows the values of confining pressure and the cyclic or deviatoric stress through the 15 sequences of the testing according to standard specifications. And the figure shows the steps of sample preparation, which dimensions for this sample is 100 millimeters for diameter and 200 for height. And the cycle duration equal 1 second, which divided to 0.2 second for loading and 0.8 second for rest period or rest duration. For the soil shear strengths, as I said, we conducted two types of testing for shear parameters, which are unconfined compression test for cohesive soils to conduct the C parameters, and the unconsolidated undrained triaxial test for cohesionless soil to estimate the shear parameters, which are C or cohesion value and angle of friction value. For the analysis results, which includes the resilient models results, modeling, and generation of new anticipated field stresses, and finally conducted new correlations between MR and CPR according to the values or characterizations of local subgrade materials. We divided the local investigated materials into two types according to the CPR values, which are the first one is the materials with CPR values less than 10%, and the others for CPR values higher than 10% and less than 25%. And we depend on two models for resilient models predicted, which are universal model and the key tau model, which are suitable for fine materials and subgrade materials. As shown, the two models conducted a good fitting for MR predicted values using the two models, the universal and the key tau models. And this for soil shear parameters, the table shows the values of shear parameters for two groups. The group one for CPR values less than 10%, and the second for higher than 10% and less than 25%, as shown in the tables. Group one, all or most of materials were clay soil. So it has they have only the value of C values, and the other group includes the two values of C and phi parameters. For the generation of anticipated field stresses, we depend on nonlinear analysis, and we use uh, two types of traffic loading, which are the default case and the critical case. Default case as used for G study, which is the values of F and B. F is will load and B is contact pressure. The F is equal 20 kilonewton for default case and the 32 kilonewton for critical case for contact pressure equal 566 kilopascal for default case and the 920 kilopascal for critical case. Uh, the thickness for pavement layers used as in a G study to conduct the maximum vertical and horizontal values of stresses at the top of subgrade materials. The vertical stress represents the values of deviatoric stress, and the horizontal stress represents the values of confining pressure. And we used the modulus for asphalt and the base layer as used for G study. However, for subgrade, we depend on the characterization of local investigated subgrade materials using a nonlinear analysis by layer softwares. As shown, the number of runs is 320 runs based on the different cases for traffic loading and number of investigated materials and the number of thickness for asphalt and the base layers. It's rate dependent models used in Kern software. Kern depend on two types of models for nonlinear analysis. The first one for the clay soil, Thompson and the Elliott model, and the second for the other soils. So we should calculate the values of the key for key theta model and the values for Thompson and the Elliott models to use it in the inputs for Kern layer software. This table shows the all input values using in the Kern layer analysis, which includes the key values for two models and shear parameters and the density of all materials. The output includes the values of the maximum vertical stress at the top of subgrade materials and the maximum horizontal stress. And as we said, the values of vertical stress represent the deviatoric stress, and the values of horizontal represent the confining pressure. As we show, the two figures show the values of maximum vertical stress at the top of subgrade materials at two cases, critical case and the default case of loading. And we show the values is not constant and they depend on the behavior of materials. And we also generate a range for vertical stress or deviatoric stress based on local materials. And the two figures showed the values of horizontal stress at the top of subgrade materials and also showed the values is not constant for investigated materials. And we can compare the values of deviatoric stress and the confining pressure for three cases. The first one for default case, for the new anticipated field stress, and the second for critical case for the new anticipated field stress, and the third for the published anticipated field stresses in the G study. For example, as we show for the group one for CPR less than 10%, the deviatoric stress ranged between 0.6 to 9.5 psi or pound per inch square, and for deviatoric stress range between 6 to 7 pound per inch squares. I think is that there is a huge difference between two ranges for default and the published in the G study because the different characterization of materials. And these figures shows a comparison between the default case, critical case, and G case of resilient models values based on local investigated local anticipated field stresses and the published for G study. I show it's not equal. For example, when it shows the values for C2 the soil C2 is the critical case has the maximum values of an MR. However, the G case includes the lower values. When we depend on the values for G study, we use the only for C2, we use on 90 megapascal for design, and this includes a higher thickness of pavement. However, for used low anticipated field stress includes lower thickness, and unlike for others materials such as for the C7. The values for a G study, MR values for G study higher than for default case for new antibiotic stress. So when use result models in this case conduct a thickness for pavement layers lower than which we should use for it. And this for the second group for CBR values higher than 10% and lower than 25%. For the MR and CBR correlations, we conducted correlations based on default case and the critical case, and for the two groups. So we have four correlations, two for default case at two groups, and two for critical case and two at two groups. When we show the comparison between resilient models value proposed using the new correlations and the predicted resilient model using the universal at average values of the new anticipated field stress. For the new proposed correlations, conducted a more accurate value and a less biased value compared to the old or current correlation used in Egyptian code. For example, for group CBR less than 10%, the values of MR for current correlations less than the values for predicted MR. So it will conducted higher thickness of pavement. It's not economic. And for the other group, the resilient models values for current correlations higher is less than the predicted for which includes less saving thickness for pavement layers. And this figures for the critical case for traffic loading conducted in this study. Finally, for the permanent screen results and the modeling, as we know, the testing sequence depends on the stresses, durations, and the number of cycles. For stresses includes the deviatoric and the confining stresses. And for the literature, the confining pressure range between 15 to 100 kilopascal, and the deviatoric stress range between 34 to 350 kilopascal. And for the duration includes the loading duration and the rest duration. For the loading range according to the literature view, 0.1 to 0.5 second. And the rest range between 0.4 to 2.7 second. And the number of cycles range between 10 10,000 to 100,000 cycles. So, as we know, the test of repeated loading um, to study the behavior of permanent deformation is not standard, and it's not standard test. So this study, we conducted new protocol for multi-stage repeated loading tri-axial test according to the new anticipated field stresses, which includes the three passes of loading, and the first pass includes the three stages of loading, and the second includes two stage, and finally the third includes the C3 stage. The number of load for each stage equal 5,000, and the range of confining pressure between 35 to 70 for the all sequences of the protocol. For the cycle, the loading duration equal to zero point 0.2 seconds according for most of the literature, and the second equal 0.8 second, and the dimension of sample preparations as used for repeated loading triaxial test according to H2T T307. We used only four types of investigated local subgrade materials, which are T1, T2, and T3, and T4. Um, and the total number of cycles is 40,000, and the only two types of soils conducted on all the cycles according to the figures, which shows the cumulative permanent strains through the all number of cycles. And there are two types of soils which are T1 and the T4, includes only 30,000 of cycles and a failure after that. And the two figures show the sample after testing for the T1 sample and the T3, which um, conducted and complete the total number of cycles. Most of models for Berman 3 under one stage of repeated loading triaxial test. And this study conducted multi-stage repeated loading triaxial test. We depend the models for GTEL and the Corcuela Tanto model. However, these models generated under one stage. So we modified these models to be more suitable for multi-stage repeated loading triaxial test by using time hardening theory, by replace the n value with any new value as shown in the two equations. And for example, the material T1 as shown, the modified Coquille tend to conducted more fitting for values compared to for measured permanent strain. However, for the modified cheated model, conducted less accurate values as shown in the figures. And another example for T1 as shown is modified cheated failed to fitting the permanent strain with measured permanent strain as shown. So for the conclusion and recommendation, for conclusions, a database of index properties for collected local subgrade materials in Egypt was developed, and the new anticipated field stresses were generated using multi-stage repeated loading based on two loading conditions and the properties of subgrade investigated materials. And the new anticipated field stress was conducted, and which were different compared to JEDEL study. Uh, the new deviatoric stress and confining pressure for subgrade materials with CPR less than 10% range between 4.1 to 65.5 kilopascal and zero point 0.7 to 6.2 kilopascal respectively under the default condition, while they were 6.2 to 106.9 kilopascal and 1.429 kilopascal respectively under the critical condition. For the subgrade with 10% with CPR values higher than 10% and less than 25%, the ranges were 13.8 to 147.5 kilopascal and 1.4 to 32.4 kilopascal respectively under the default case, and for the critical condition ranged between 17.2 to 259 kilopascal and 2 to 67 kilopascal respectively. And as shown in the figures, previous figures, the current correlations between MR and CPR yielded highly biased MR prediction and less accurate compared to the new correlated based on the local investigated subgrade materials. And a non-standard multi-stage repeated loading triaxial test was used to measure permanent deformation based on the failure envelopes predicted by the proposed anticipated field stresses developed in this study. And as shown, the Curcula tend to modify Curcula tend to model fitting conducted a good fitting for permanent strain measures compared to the digital model. For the recommendations, the Committee of Egyptian Code considers the new correlation between MR and CPR and the more sources for local subgrade material from other non-investigated region in Egypt should be collected to cover more properties, especially sand soil, and the more soil properties such as matrix suction and various moisture contents need to be considered in further investigation, which is it's good important to verify the developed models in this study. And finally, the multi-stage repeated loading triaxial test should be conducted on more non-investigated local subgrade materials and a new developed model for permanent deformation with more materials and further investigations under multi-stage stresses is required. Through this study, we published a paper in Road Materials and the Pavement Design Journal. And we said this project was funded by Mansoura University, and the PI for this project, Dr. Ahmed Mutwalli, and the co-PI Prof. Dr. Sharif Badawi and me. Thank you.
Shukran, Abdullah. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. And it's good that you presented it in English, and your English is good as well.
Thank you.
Let me mention one thing. This project was a continuation of another project that was completed with the National Institute of Transportation. And it was focusing upon developing an MR-CPR relationship for the granular base and sub-base materials. And the idea behind the first project was that we found that our CPR MR correlation that was implemented in the Egyptian code, in the previous Egyptian code, was yielding. We feel that the MR that we get from this equation, which was taken from the South African manual, was really high compared to the properties of the Egyptian base and sub-base materials that we are familiar with. So this is why we proposed this research project to develop a new or locally calibrate the MR-CPR equation for the base layer and sub-base layers in Egypt. And in that project, I guess we tested like several base materials from different ongoing like highway or pavement construction projects across Egypt from different quarries. And I don't remember how many samples. I guess like maybe about 20 samples. I'm not sure now. But what we had when we developed our correlation, or when we locally calibrate the MRCBR, we found that the old equations actually over predicted the MR for our base layers. For example, at 80% CBR, which is a typical MR, which is a typical CBR value for our base layers, we usually get about 52,000 psi for the resilient modulus based on the old equation. But based on our new calibrated equation, the MR value is about, I think, less than 40,000 psi, which is more logic. So this means that when we used the older equation, we were always over predicting the MR value, and this means that our pavement design, we are underestimating the thicknesses of the base and asphalt layers. So based on the new equations, which is now implemented in the Egyptian code since 2021, I think when you do design the pavement structures here in Egypt based on the new equation, you will definitely get like thicker pavements, like thicker asphalt layers as well as a base layer. Abdullah's work is a continuation of this work, because there is another equation in the Egyptian code that correlates the MR to the CBR of the subgrade layers. And usually for weak subgrades with CBR less than 10%, this equation calls for the MR equals 1500 CBR, and this is in PSI units. So what Abdullah found is that this correlation is not accurate for our materials. And also he looked at in Egypt, we usually overloading our pavements because we don't have like really good restrictions on the legal load limits. So a lot of trucks are wandering over the roads here in Egypt with like heavier loads than they supposed to be. And as you guys know, the modulus of the layer is stress dependent. However, the CBR is not stress dependent. So if we took the stresses into consideration, the game changes. And this is why we thought about, what if we have roads that are exposed to overloaded trucks? What is going to be the consequences of this? And you know that some materials will exhibit like stress hardening. This means when you increase the stress state, your modulus is going to increase. And this is usually for the coarse materials. And for the fine materials, what you get is this like stress softening, which means that when you increase the stress state, you get like lower modulus values. And when Abdullah showed the effect of the anticipated field stresses in both cases, you may see that some soils will show some stress hardening, while others showed some stress softening cases. So the importance of this research is that you always have to, when you get like a correlation from another country, you always have to look at the at this correlation. You have to investigate, is it valid or still valid for your local materials and your local loading and environmental conditions, or it has to be locally calibrated. And the field practice said that you always have to recalibrate the models you copy from other countries based on your local material conditions. And now we are expecting some questions from you guys. اي اسئله ممكن تساله بالعربي عادي، مفيش مشكله. اسئله يا شباب. دكتور علي ازيك؟ مفيش اسئله ولا ايه يا عبد الله؟ انت ايه، الناس ما حدش يسال ولا ايه؟
مش عارف بقى، شكلي عرضتها كويس فكله فاهم.
يا راجل.
مش عارف.
دكتور احمد نجيب.
لا، وانا ما عنديش اسئله بصراحه يا دكتور. يعني الحقيقه الموضوع عبد الله عرضه بشكل ممتاز. يعني انا بس كان عندي سؤال خاص بحته الكورليشن. انا شايف ان الكورليشن او الار سكوير فاليوز بتاعت الاولد موديل، مش عارف، بالنسبه لي مش منطقيه قوي بناء على الداتا بتاع الايكويتي لاين. يعني انا مش عارف لو
اصل
تجيبها يا عبد الله تاني.
الاولد
اه
موديل هي دي
اه
مبنيه على ماتيريال تانية، كاركترايزيشن تانية، فلما جينا نطبقها على الماتيريال بتاعتنا طلعت لنا ال الشكل الفيجر ده اللي هو بعيده قوي عن الارقام المفروض تطلع، او المفروض ميجرد بناء على الريبيتد لودنج تراي اكسل تيست.
خلي بالك،
مم.
هو الاولد موديل was based only on 6 different soils.
امم
تمام. فده عدد قليل قوي انك تبني عليه موديل وتقول ان الموديل ده كان بي جنرالايزد على اي سويل تانية السي بي ار بتاعها اقل من 10%، لان بالذات الفاريابيليتي في السب جريد ماتيريال هتبقى عاليه. ممكن نقول ان الفاريابيليتي في البيز والسب بيز ماتيريال مش هتبقى ذات هاي، لان ليها ستاندردز. يعني انت في مواصفه للتدرج ومواصفه للليكويد ليميت واللاستيستي اندكس ريستريكتد، يعني ليها رينج قليل في الفاريابيليتي. انما السب جريد ما عندكش مواصفه. انت السب جريد الليكويد ليميت بتاعتها ممكن تكون somewhere between وات ايفر لحد ممكن توصل 50 و60 و70%. البلاستيستي اندكس نفس الكلام، الجراديشن نفس الكلام. فبالتالي انك تبني موديل للام ار سي بي ار للسب جريد بيزد على 6 ماتيريالز فقط وتقول ان ده كان بي جنرالايزد لاي سويل، اكيد لا. وحتى الموديل اللي احنا بنيناه هو ستيل هو بيزد على مثلا عبد الله قال مش فاكر
16
20
16 16.
16 سويل، ستيل برضو ده مش كافي.
امم
لكن هي بدايه، هي في الاول وفي الاخر بدايه. if you can increase الداتابيز دي كل فتره، لو احنا if we kept يعني في ده انا كنت بتكلم على ان احنا حتى في البيز والسب بيز وكذلك في السب جريد، لو كل ماتيريال بتجيلنا المعمل بنعمل عليها الاختبارات دي، كنا نقدر كل شويه نابديت المودلز دي بحيث تبقى مور ريلايبل ومور اكيوريت. هو في مودلز كتيره في الليتريتشر الناس بتنسى، بتبقى اتنشرت والناس بتستخدمها وما رجعوش تاني لأصل المودلز دي، وهل هي valid ان هي to be generalized ولا لا. فده واحد من المودلز اللي هي بتستخدم almost على مستوى العالم، اللي هو ال 1500 سي بي ار ده، بدون ما ناس كتيرة تعمل له calibration وتشوف هل هو valid ولا لا. وبيزد على الشغل اللي اتعمل ده، لا هو محتاج اكيد more materials to be tested. وكمان الموديل، حتى الموديل اللي عبد الله عمله محتاج ريفاينمنت بمور تيستد ماتيريالز. يعني كل ما هنزود الماتيريالز اكتر ونinclude يعني variety of materials and subgrade بالذات، في طبعا a whole range of material with different properties هيبقى افضل اكيد.
متفق مع حضرتك. بس على ما اذكر كان في موديل تاني يا دكتور شريف وعبد الله، اللي هو اعتقد السي بي ار الاكبر من 10%. انا مش متذكر الموديل
اه
بالظبط بس
اه، ما هو
كان
ده بتاع البيز بقى، اللي هو
بتاع
كان
البيز والسم.
ار اس 64 من 100 او
بالظبط
2565 سي بي ار اس 64 من 100. ما ده احنا غيرناه برضو في الكود المصري.
بناء على دراسة عبد الله ولا دراسة تانية؟
لا،
لا، بناء
اه
على المشروع اللي انا حكيت عنه من شويه، اللي هو كان مع
بالظبط.
معهد النقل ومعانا احنا اللي عملنا الشغل يعني، بس كان الفند من معهد النقل. وطلعنا موديل جديد. الغريب ان انا حافظ الموديلز القديمه لكن مش حافظ الموديل بتاعنا. الكوفيشنز اتغيرت تمام.
4920 في السي بي ار اس 48 ماي.
مظبوط. فالكوفيشنس اتغيرت بناء على الماتيريالز بتاعتنا هنا في مصر، وده بيدي قيم اقل في الام ار من القيم اللي الموديل الاولاني كان بيعطيها، اللي هو كان في الكود اللي قبل ده. فده اتغير فعلا، ويعني ان شاء الله في الابديت اللي جاي في الكود اعتقد احنا ممكن نعرض شغل عبد الله ده على الكوميتي، اللجنه الدايمه للكود، بحيث ان هم لو فكروا ممكن يتعمل له امبلمنتيشن برضه. بس I hope by that time يعني ان احنا نقدر نزود الداتابيز عن كده، لانه انا دايما السب جريد بالذات بتحتاج تو تيست يعني ماتيريال اكتر.
اتفق مع حضرتك يا دكتور، والحقيقه كونتريبيوشن قوي ان هو يبقى المعادله يعني تو بي امبلمنتد في الجيفن كود يعني. ف فشغل مميز يا عبد الله، وشكرا جزيلا يعني.
شكرا لحضرتك.
هو طبعا فكرة الشغل ده، ودي الناس بتدور على correlations عشان الشباب يبقوا فاهمين، لانه انا ساعات بيبقى عندي بروبرتي صعب ان انا الاقي القياسات بتاعتها متوفرة في معظم المعامل. الام ار كتست بيحتاج very expensive equipment، بيحتاج جهاز تراي اكسيال بيدي دايناميك لودنج، وده مش متوفر في معامل كتير. يعني مصر كلها ما فيش من الجهاز ده في مصر غير 4. أولهم كان عندنا هنا في المنصورة، أو مش أولهم، بس إحنا أول ناس عملوا اختبار الام ار في مصر. جامعة القاهرة عندهم واحد، بس ما كانوش بيستخدموه في الام ار. وبعد كده الجامعة الأمريكية عندهم MTS برضو ممكن يعملوا الاختبار. جامعة هيئة الطرق بقى اشتروا واحد بعد كده، وكذلك المقاولين العرب. فهم دول الأجهزة اللي موجودة في مصر. لكن كام واحد بيعمل اختبار الام ار فعلي في مصر بشكل يعني واضح ومفهوم؟ بيتهيألي احنا الوحيدين في المنصورة اللي بنعمله بشكل واضح. مفيش معمل روتيني هيبقى فيه جهاز الام ار ده، لانه فيري اكسبنسيف. بيحتاج دايما اللي يتعاملوا معاه مش هيبقى فني. الاناليسيس بتاع الداتا بيبقى صعب مش سهل، برضه عايز حد فاهم. فعشان كده انت عايز تربطه او تحوله لبروبرتي تانية سهلة زي السي بي ار، او انت مش تقدر تقيسه فعايز تربطه ببروبرتي تانية تقدر تقيسها للسويل بسهولة. السي بي ار ده اختبار متوفر في اي معمل روتيني، جهاز فيري سيمبل مش اكسبنسيف، اجراء التجربة بسيط، اي فني يقدر يعملها، مش محتاج حد يعني مهندس او كده. فخلاص اذا انا عندي السي بي ار بتاع الماتيريال فاقدر ابريدكت الام ار، لان الام ار هو الفاندمنتال بروبرتي اللي انت بتحتاجها في طريقه التصميم الانشائي للطرق. يعني الاشتو 1993 هي بتحتاج الام ار كانبوت للسب جريد والبيز والسب بيز، ما بتحتاجش السي بي ار. فعشان كده احنا بنديفلوب الكوريليشنز دي، انك تحول او تقيس بروبرتي سهل قياسها في المعمل، ومنها تستنتج بروبرتي صعبة القياس في المعمل. في طبعا ناس كتيرة بتتكلم على ان الام ار ده ستريس ديبندنت بروبرتي، يعني بتتغير قيمة الام ار بتتغير بتغير الستريس. انما السي بي ار هو اتس فيلير تيست، ده اختبار ستاتيك ده اختبار دايناميك، يعني في فروق كتيرة ما بين الاثنين، لكن في النهاية ده امبيريكال كورليشن وبيزد على الاستاتستيكال مودلز دي. الاكيوريسي بتاع المودلز مقبوله جدا، يعني الار سكوير بتاعتها مقبوله جدا، ف you can use it يعني. فهي دي الفكره الاصليه بتاعت الشغل.
شكرا جزيلا يا دكتور. الحقيقه التوضيح ده بتهيألي كان مهم جدا برضو، الناس تفهم ليه الهدف من ان احنا بنحاول نلاقي كورليشن، بحيث الناس برضو اللي لسه اعتقد فيه، انا شايف ناس لسه مسجلين يعني او لسه في المواد دي، يعني ممكن الموضوع يبقى بالنسبه لهم انترستنج يعني.
طبعا ده الهدف الاساسي من الشغل، او ده الفكره الاساسيه من الشغل. ويعني مهم قوي ان الشباب دول كلهم يعرفوا statistics كويس، لان اي شغل في الاخر انت بتحوله لداتا، والداتا دي عايز تتعامل معاها. تو انالايز الداتا محتاج تفهم احصاء كويس قوي. فبرضه نصيحه من دلوقتي الناس تبدا تقرا في الستاتستكس شويه، سواء بقى كان ريجريشن موديل ولا نيورال نتورك ولا الحاجات الجديده يعني، والهايبوثيسيس تيستنج والحاجات الجميله بتاع الاحصاء دي.
هو الحقيقة دي نقطة يا دكتور، وانا من هنا انا حابب اقول للناس برضو في مواقع على فكرة مجانية كويسة جدا بتقدم كورسز بتدرس في جامعات بره، يعني كورسيرا، يوديمي. الحاجات دي بتبقى فري كورسز، واعتقد بتبقى فرصة كويسة بالذات في الاحصاء والكلام ده، اعتقد محتاجين انكم تبصوا عليه يعني.
طبعا.
هو بس فرصة بقى علشان الناس حاضرة يا دكتور شريف، لو حضرتك تسمح لي، أنا كلمت الدكتور عمر البجلاتي، وإحنا طبعا إن شاء الله عندنا يوم علمي يوم 4/11، الوفد اللي جاي من جامعة أسم اللي هو تبع المشروع البحثي بتاع دكتور أحمد. أتمنى الناس برضو تيجي المعمل من الصبح، يعني هيكون في عدد من البرزنتيشنز منهم ومن من ناس عندنا، وبعدين إن شاء الله الأسبوع اللي بعده هيكون دكتور عمر البجلاتي، يعني أنا كلمته وهو ان شاء الله هيتكلم عن موضوع الانفستيجيشن بتاع السب سيرفيس سويل يعني باستخدام الجي بي ار. فاعتقد الموضوع برضو انترستنج قوي. برضو هبعت للناس اللينك، وان شاء الله هنزله على لينكد ان شاء الله.
طيب كويس ان انت رتبت من دلوقتي، في حال بقى الاعلانات تبقى جاهزه من بدري علشان يبقى في اتندنس كويس. ويا ريت تتواصل مع كريشنا برضو، انا هو مستني ان
هبعت له
انا
ايميل.
اتواصل معاه.
اكيد هبعت له ايميل النهارده يا دكتور او بكره بالكتير ان شاء الله، واحاول ان انا انسق بحيث انه يكون يعني حسب ما يناسبه من وقت بقى ان شاء الله، لان التوقيت مختلف زي ما حضرتك قلت لي. فان شاء الله برضه هعلن عنه قبلها بوقت كافي بحيث ان الناس تقدر تحضر ان شاء الله.
طيب تمام ممتاز. ويا جماعه يوم 4 نوفمبر ده مهم قوي ان الناس تحضر، يعني كل الناس اللي في المنصوره وحواليها يعني يحاولوا يبقوا موجودين. ويا ريت ننزل السكادول من بدري يا دكتور احمد
ان
عشان
شاء الله
الناس
يا
تبقى
دكتور،
عارفه
انا ان شاء الله
امتى.
هنزل السكادول
واكيد مكتبين احنا هيبقى عندنا 4 برزنتيشنز من الجانب الألماني ولا كام أنا معرفش.
اربعه
هم الضيوف اللي
برزنتيشن.
جايين 4.
اه
واحنا برضو هنقدم الشغل من عندنا بحيث الناس تعرف هما بيشتغلوا في ايه واحنا بنشتغل في ايه. فبرضو ده هيبقى فرصة ان انتوا تشوفوا الناس بره بيشتغلوا في ايه.
ولو في امكانيه، انا مش عارف ده هيكون متاح او لا يا دكتور شريف، لكن لو في امكانيه ان شاء الله نحاول نعمل برضو بث للصفحه بتاعت يعني اونلاين ستريمنج كده للبرزنتيشنز. لو ده نفع فان شاء الله الناس حتى اللي هي يعني سافره او كده هتقدر تكون موجوده معانا ان شاء الله. طبعا الناس اللي حوالين المنصوره طبعا
بس
دي
يعني
موجوده.
الناس اللي قريبة تحاول تحضر، يعني ايه ما يكسلوش.
لان ده مش اكيد، احنا هنحاول لسه حسب توافر التقنيه بقى والنت والكلام ده في الجامعه، فهنشوف القصه دي ان شاء الله يعني.
لا دي ما فيش مشكلة، المعمل فيه انترنت
انا عارف
وهيشتغل كويس.
ان شاء الله.
لكن انا اقصد ان انا يهمني برضو الناس تبقى حاضره، اللي يعرف يحضر فيس تو فيس يعني ده الاساس في اليوم ده ان شاء الله.
ان شاء الله يا دكتور، برضو ان الناس تحضر عشان موضوع الكونكشنز ده برضو موضوع مهم يعني، فتعمل يعني كونكشن مع الناس اللي جايه، ويعني فرصه كويسه.
والله انا لما رحت المانيا عند الناس دول كان حاضر، انا عملت برزنتيشن عن شغلنا كان حاضر مش اقل من 20 30 واحد من الجراد ستودنتس بتوعهم. فيعني احنا المفروض كل الناس
حلو
تحضر.
ان شاء الله. انا برضو عملت ريكورد للسيشن ديت، واقفين كده ريكورد دلوقتي، وهنزله برضو على اليوتيوب على القناه اللي هي انا يمكن عملت بين لللينك بتاعها، واللينك تري بتاع المعمل برضو انا حاطه، فالناس اتمنى برضو تبقى موجوده على الصفحات بتاعه المعمل، وبحيث انها تبقى متابعه دايما يعني ان شاء الله.
طيب تمام زي الفل.